Ben Sutherly, hello, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be with you.
Excellent. Ben is the president of the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance. Today we're going to talk about the Alliance, what they've done, where they are, and where they plan to go. So Ben, with that, tell us a little bit about the Alliance, how it started, and how you got involved.
Sure. So Bill, the Troy Historic Preservation Alliance has been around formally for about 4 years now. And we advocate for the preservation, restoration, and repurposing of Troy's historic places. And we are a nonprofit organization that really focuses on advocacy work and education around our local history so that residents and visitors and other stakeholders in downtown Troy really appreciate the tremendous history that we are the inheritors of, and it just makes for an enjoyable environment being in our downtown historic district. So we try to look out for that, and we saw a void around that a few years ago, and stepped into that void in a pretty significant way. But prior to that, if you go back several years to say the 2017-2018 time period, to answer your question, how I got involved was I'm a Miami County native, grew up in Elizabeth Township east of Troy, still live in Elizabeth Township east of Troy. Come from a family that believes in preservation. I'm actually pretty active with the township's farmland preservation program and oversee that on behalf of the township. So have always had an appreciation that probably I got inherited from my grandma, my dad's mom, more than anyone, just to really value what we have around us and don't take it for granted and take the long view when it comes to that. So always had an interest in that. And then I was involved with the Overfield Tavern Museums board. And there was, had heard one time when I was visiting that there was a proposal to demolish the old Trinity Church, which is at the southwest corner of Walnut and Franklin Streets in Troy. And really kind of unsettled me significantly. The family abuse shelter owned the property at the time, and a shelter next door, and they were using the old church for some programming space, but they really needed to expand. And our concern was that they were going to tear down one of the earliest churches in Troy, where William Henry Harrison had dedicated the Miami-Erie Canal. And they weren't necessarily going to gain a lot of footprint out of it. So we formed a citizens committee to try to persuade the family abuse shelter to relocate. And we actually had to get somewhat public and active in that space. But to their credit, the abuse shelter then did finally take a serious look at relocating operations out of the downtown, or at least some of their operations. And, now they're on Crescent Drive. And I think if you ask them today, they're very pleased with what their new space is able to offer to their programming and to the community. So I think it turned out being a win-win. But that was where my early interest started with historic preservation in Troy specifically. And then, of course, we had a situation a couple years later where a house that the Methodist Church owned just south of the church was approved for demolition by the Planning Commission. And that was pretty unsettling for the Southwest Historic District to lose that property. And that was my good friend Carol Kerber, where she had raised her family. And I call it the Kerber house, even though other folks live there subsequent to the Kerbers living there. But that was a little bit of a wake-up call, I think, for the community that we can't really rest on our laurels when it came to historic properties in the downtown. And then, of course, then the big kahuna came along, which was after a tornado hit the downtown in January 2020. And as you know, Bill, many buildings downtown sustained damage out of that freak weather event. But there was one building in particular that never got repaired. And it soon became evident that there were some other plans for that building that we were never, it was never really made public or clear exactly what those were. So it really became more formal, and we saw that there was a need for to organize as a nonprofit and to kind of start to really advocate and defend, in some cases, some of these properties in the downtown area. And that ultimately led to, some court action, led to, the street being closed for 10 months. Who can forget that when West Main Street was closed? But ultimately, I think it was a test for our community. And while I certainly am not happy that the road was closed for 10 months, I don't think anybody was. I think it gave us an opportunity to learn some important lessons. So so that's a little bit about how THPA came into existence. And of course, Julie McMiller is the one who approached me. I think it was in the fall of 2020. When it became clear that they were going to attempt to demolish the building. And of course, Julie's one of our board members, but I kind of credit her with getting me into this whole affair. I'll call it that on a public channel.
So you talked a little bit about some of the lessons that you learned.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the whole IOOF building debacle demonstrated was really the power of citizens that were able to create a change in the community that the powers that be really didn't want to have happen. And I'm curious, what are some of those lessons that you think that the THPA learned that you could share with other like-minded organizations or just residents that are interesting to advocate for change in their own communities?
Yeah, that's a good question, Bill. I would say, so first of all, just a little context, and then I'll kind of get to the takeaways piece. But yes, I mean, just fairly recently, I met with somebody from Dayton who is kind of active in this space, very knowledgeable in this space, and basically say, yeah, when I was reading the news accounts that the city and frankly the county too were intent on that building coming down, he saw what we were trying to do as a group, and along with the neighbors. I can't overlook the neighboring property owners who played a major role, especially Jeremy Tome, who was kind of the legal force behind our work. But I don't think we can overlook the fact that it was a long shot. I was advised when we went to court to try to overturn the city planning commission's approval of demolition. We were advised, normally those cases are only successful about 20% of the time. Mm-hmm. So it was a long shot. But we thought it was worth taking, but it was calculated because I think the city for many years had been accustomed to making things work the way they needed to make things work, and they weren't always playing by the rules of their own zoning code, and so they would they were frankly cutting corners here or there. I mean, that's what the judge found, and that's what gave us a sufficient level of confidence to invest, tens of thousands of dollars to challenge the case in court. I mean, it was not cheap at all. So it was a real victory for historic preservation, not just in Miami County, but really on a state level. It was taken note of by many groups. We were definitely the underdogs. There's no doubt about it. I think the takeaways from it, though, Bill, were, if you are willing to find like-minded people and come together and build common ground with different folks, find enough common ground with different organizations, because we weren't just supported in our effort to stabilize the building. For those who aren't aware of what happened with the building, we were on the hook as part of a settlement agreement in court to stabilize the building in basically a 4-month period. Had to take ownership of the building sight unseen. And it was daunting. It was a daunting situation to be in. And you had to have enough people who had shared some similar values in some ways to make it work. And it took a lot of tenacity too. I mean, it was a tough slog for many, many months through court. And then, of course, through fundraising, we had to raise about $800,000, and ultimately got up to about $1 million when you include in-kind contributions to get that building the help that it needed. Because, to be fair, that building had languished. It had languished for several decades. Since you and I were probably before we were born, long before we were born, those upper floors of that building had sat vacant since 1939. So It needed a lot. But we also believe the building was not beyond saving, that it was a big part of that block. I kind of consider it and the Masonic Temple across the street kind of the two front teeth in the downtown smile when you're coming in on West Main Street, because there's such large buildings compared to the other buildings, and they really give you that visual cue, like you are entering the commercial heart of this town.
Yeah.
And to just have one of those historic front teeth knocked out, maybe or not, it gets replaced. But when it gets replaced, just like in your smile, maybe it's with a gold tooth that doesn't really look quite right along with the rest of your mouth. So I would say it was really about, the takeaway for us was, it's about finding those areas of common ground and building that up and really collaborating. And I think you even stated this one time, I mean, collaboration won out over control, because you had a situation where you had, there was an effort to control the outcome and impose an outcome, and that we didn't agree with, and that I think history will judge would not have been the right outcome for the town. We're still seeing how, that the building is still being renovated right now, but making good progress on that front. And I think it'll probably be a few years before you can say conclusively, yes, that was the right decision. But I'm highly confident that the right decision was made, and it reflects collaboration winning out over control. It really comes down to that. But it took a lot of tenacity. Honestly, I think if I were advising others, I would say, you've got to really exercise every tool in that toolbox. I'm a former reporter. I worked as a reporter for 17 years, and public records were really, really important for us to try to went over the hearts and minds of our fellow citizens in the community. We had a very active social media presence that was fueled to a large extent by public records that showed facts that some other people probably would have preferred would have stayed in the shadows.
Well, and I think you're right. It does appear like a lot of these things were done in a very kind of cloak and dagger type approach to keep residents in the dark. I mean, I hate to say that, but I think that was the approach that many people took when it came to this situation.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciated about the approach the THPA took is that every time you came to city council to talk, it was not in a confrontational manner. It was done in a manner that was like, hey, these are the facts, that the way we see them. We want to be part of a discussion that we believe can find common ground, as you talked about, and come up with a solution that we believe everybody can win with. And there were some individuals that didn't appreciate that approach. And I'm just curious, I mean, when you had, I'm sure you had other conversations with the city other than speaking at council meetings. Was that same kind of attitude prevalent in those conversations as well, where it's like, we're not really interested in what you have to say. We're not interested in finding common ground. It's like, this is what we want to do and we're going to do it.
Yeah, there were conversations outside of those public meetings, and unfortunately, but the tune wasn't a lot different in those private conversations. But it was interesting, you know, we met with some key city folks and some other downtown stakeholders in the spring of 2021, and that was. And really, the focus of the meeting was intended to not be on the IOOF building. But of course, at that point, the owner of the building at the time had already applied for demolition once, had withdrawn the application, and was still exploring some options. But there was this potential that they were going to come back and apply again. So that's kind of the context for the conversation. And so, of course, it was kind of the elephant in the room, and it ended up, even though the intent wasn't to talk a lot about it, it ended up being the predominant topic of conversation. But the message that I got was, you know, hey, it's great we're having these conversations, but at this point, you know, there's way too much water that's passed under the bridge. Now, this was in the spring of 2021. So think about after that, how much water had yet to pass beneath the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, you're just 1 year after the tornado.
Right. It was a year after the tornado. It was about 15 months after the tornado, and I've looked at that message, and it's like, if only all of the parties and all the stakeholders had the way I look at it, we each had some puzzle pieces we could have potentially brought together to the table, laid them all out there and say, what is possible? What's missing? Where are the gaps? Can we have a conversation about that? And, you know, it unfortunately, the environment was not created for that. Not until Judge Wall, who presided over the case in late 2023, when she was trying to, you know, mediate something, that was really the first effort to try to really bring all the parties together and find some common ground was made. And you think that was, you know, 2.5 years later, of course, you had businesses being greatly inconvenienced by the closing of the street plate, some of them facing basically existential crises by having the road closed. And it just seemed like there was a real missed opportunity there. Now, to be fair, we were a young organization that hadn't earned our stripes yet. And so, you know, they may have figured like, well, who are you? Well, I hope the next time something like this happens, we don't get that reaction. Because I think we showed that we were willing. And I mean, I got to take a minute here to give kudos to our board. I mean, we've got an 11-member board, and every single member of that board went to the mat for the building, went to the mat for our mission. New people reached out to people. It was a Herculean effort by many, many people. And then you had your hundreds of people who contributed, on top of that. And so and the neighboring property owners again, there's just so many people that took to come up with a successful outcome. But I think there was a missed opportunity there. And I think there are still some things that probably should change, that if we don't learn from what's happened the past few years, it's really a wasted opportunity.
So as you and your team was kind of embarking on this journey, one of the things that I saw from my perspective being on city council is that, there was not a clear roadmap, because a lot of these decisions were made at the planning commission level, which we can have a very long discussion about some of the structural issues with our planning commission.
Right.
And then city council itself was kind of had their hands tied, because there really wasn't anything they could do statutorily to create these changes. And so it's like,
right.
You had to almost build the plane while you were flying in many respects.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, what are some of those, from your perspective, what were some of the structural issues that you saw with the planning commission and with the city council as they were trying to come up with some way to solve this problem? Because I do believe there were some council members that did not fully support the administration's decision as it went forward, and we're looking for opportunities to mediate something.
Well, and to that point, and I'm going to address the planning commission in a minute, your question about that. But, council did do something from the standpoint of there was a moratorium put in place after this, after the planning commission voted in 2021 to allow the owner to demolish the building. Had that not happened, so the moratorium then led to a rewriting of a portion of the zoning code. And had that not happened, the owner would have had the possibility, when they lost in court, to go back through the process again and follow the exact same path as before, and potentially, cross their T's, dot the I's. The city crosses their T's and dots the I's, and you get the outcome as a demolition. So I would say the council stepping up and saying, and I think it was Jeff Schilling in particular who really pushed for that. Had that not happened, this could have potentially had a pretty different outcome. Now, I don't know that people at the time, I don't know that people necessarily that they knew that would be the outcome. I don't know that many people expected the court to overturn the planning commission's decision. But that in the back of my mind, there for a long time, I was just like, even if we win this case, are they just going to turn right around and use that as a playbook for, correcting their errors and then get the outcome that they want? And so again, that even, added to the unlikely outcome that we experienced, but that was very significant. I would say that moratorium and the change in the zoning laws, because that really toughened, really raised the bar in terms of what applicants had to do to, get permission to demolish a building in downtown Troy. And that bar should be high.
Now, were you involved in those discussions, or was the PHPA involved?
No.
Okay.
No, we were not. Of course, at that point, we were parties to lawsuit.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily surprising that we were not consultant number one when it came to how that should be revised. But to your point about your question about the planning commission, I think what we had there was, to me, the planning commission was really at the root of a lot of the issues that happen. You have a planning commission that does not, even today, its members do not live downtown. They don't work at businesses downtown. Now, a couple of the members work at City Hall, but I don't really consider that a business. That's a little bit of a different topic, and you've gotten into some of that in your writings. You don't have folks who own property downtown, and in fact, the mayor, I believe, was the only property owner and is in the process of selling her downtown property now. So, and you didn't have the types of professionals represented on the board that you typically try to get. So, like architects. Alan Cappers was on there at one time. He's an attorney. That's a good skill set to have. We don't have that anymore on our planning commission. We don't have any historians on the planning commission. And when you look at our neighbors to the north and south, Piqua and Tip City, that have gone through the certified local government process, and you find in the folks who make those decisions about their downtown landscape or streetscape, you're going to find that type of representation. You're going to find people who live downtown who either have that skill set or are really invested in a major way in their downtown. And Troy is an anomaly in that respect. We are very much an outlier and still are an outlier. And that, I believe, is the single biggest change that could be made that would really help to head off another situation like what happened with the Oddfellows building on West Main Street. And I can hear somebody start to bring up, but we're a statutory city. Well, a lot of statutory cities have gone through the certified local government process. There is a way to do that. And I think it takes a certain degree of curiosity, and I think it takes a certain amount of what if instead of why we can't. And there's been a lot where when it came to this situation, there was major why we can't on display at every turn. Why we can't do this, why we can't do that. And that attitude held our city back. And in a lot of respects still does hold our city back.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that why we can't is actually a coded language for we just won't. It does appear to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, we're a small Troy. I mean, Troy has grown a lot, but we're still a relatively small city in the grand scheme of things. I truly believe that if you're going to be a truly successful small city, you have to have a culture of collaboration.
Yeah.
And you cannot have the overriding vibe cannot be there's one or two people who are the smartest people in the room, and they're going to take it into a side room and figure it out. And that's the way it's going to be. That's not, I don't think that's what the most successful communities do. And I think that, I think it's way past time for Troy to address that.
Yeah. And I mean, even when you take a look at some of the structural issues with the planning commission, I mean, they typically don't allow public comments on many of the issues that they're dealing with.
Correct.
From interested parties that could be a neighboring party or anyone else. And it's just like, why not?
Right. And those questions have been asked, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like people feel like we're owed answers on questions like that, because I haven't really heard a good answer.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I am interested in is that, years and years ago, Troy had the old Board of Architectural Review. And I think one of the biggest concerns that folks, when they think about regulation of historic preservation in the city of Troy, they're like, oh my gosh, let's not go back to the Board of Architectural Review days, because those meetings were contentious, and sometimes the outcome was not great. I mean, you know, the Overfield Tavern, and I remember, like, it was back in the late 80s, early 90s, the Overfield Tavern kind of became a hodgepodge of three different historical eras, because you've got the red siding on one side and the log cabin on the other, and it just became kind of like this hodgepodge of, this is what the Board of Architecture Review thought was a good idea. So how do you combat that argument?
Yeah, and the Board of Architectural Review, I think disbanded right around the turn of the century, around 2000, I believe, maybe give or take a year or so. And I think what THPA tries to bring to the table is a certain pragmatism. So we're not advocating for every building to be a museum. We do believe in adaptive reuse. We believe, and we see them all over Troy, from Old Scratch, what they've done with the fire station, to Crafted and Cured, and what's been done with the old bank building downtown. You see multiple examples of adaptive reuse across the community, and we wholeheartedly, and so does the city administration, wholeheartedly support that. And so we are not, now I think there are some opportunities for education sometimes around how you can potentially rehab. And we just started a series this year that is going to kind of focus on, our first session was on how to research your old house, but we're going to have upcoming sessions where we're actually going to do some hands-on. How do you just do some rehab and just kind of maintenance on an old property? I think there's an opportunity for education around that. And I think the downtown, the planning commission, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The current planning commission does put their fingers into, paint colors and so forth. So it's not like BAR was, completely messed up, and the current planning commission always gets it right. I mean, and I think there's always going to be some differences of opinion over that. I mean, even within THPA, I mean, we have a diversity of opinion. Some of us, our eyebrows twitch when we see the old windows downtown being taken out and replaced. I'm one of those people. I hate seeing old windows replaced. But there are better alternatives now than just putting in a new window. I won't name any, brand names, but new vinyl window. There are alternatives to that. You can come up with a better alternative that better mimics the original look of the building. And so, and at this point, most of the original windows in our downtown buildings have already been replaced. So it's like, you have to be pragmatic about it, and you can't be the history police all the time. You've got to offer solutions, and you have to acknowledge the budgetary pressures that property owners face. I mean, it's a balance, but I would challenge anyone to, if they haven't sat down to talk with us yet, sit down and talk with us about some of these things, because I think you'll be surprised that we're not necessarily advocating for, a return to like a certain look, like you have to do your windows exactly the way they were done originally 150 years ago. I love it when some places do that. I mean, I'm on the board of the Overfield Tavern Museum. We're going to have our windows done the old way, the way they would have been done in the early 1800s, because that building needs that and is worth that kind of investment. But it is an investment, and not every building, that can't be swung for every building. So, I guess it's the Board of Architectural Review, though. I think what it got right is it was an acknowledgement that you need to have folks with some, maybe give them the appropriate guardrails, but you need to have some of that skill set in place.
Yeah.
because we were told with the Oddfellows building, well, we can go out and bring any kind of expert in to look at the building, and assess it. I mean, we can bring that expertise in when we need it. Well, fact of the matter is that didn't happen with the Oddfellows building. If there were ever a case to do that, not until very late in the process after the court case, then all of a sudden the structural engineers get brought in at that point. But early on, before the planning commission made its decision, there was never an expert that was brought in to really look at the building and advise the planning commission. So when I have folks telling me, well, we can bring in that expertise when we need it, that kind of rings hollow with me, because if there were ever a time to do that, we just saw it and you didn't do it.
Yeah, because it did appear like there was a predetermined outcome, and to this day,
it was. And Bill, I'll just I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but truly, I think we kind of came to a juncture as an organization where we had to make a decision: are we going to be a historic preservation group, or are we going to be a good governance group?
Yeah,
and that was a very hard juncture to reach. Because to your point, there were some things going on that were very inappropriate, and we ultimately had to come back to our mission and say we are here to advocate for the preservation, restoration, and repurposing of historic places. We were not set up to be a good governance group. That was the route we took. Not an easy decision.
Oh, I bet. And the only reason I say that it appealed that there was a predetermined outcome is because there was a demolition application to tear the building down and put in a parking lot. That was denied, but then there was the application to tear the building down and put in a grass lot. With the grass lot makes more sense for economic development than a building that's still standing, and no one could ever square that circle for me. It didn't make any sense.
But and that gets into some other approaches, like, well, then of course somebody would say, well, that wasn't the ultimate plan. There was something that was waiting in the wings to go there, but it's like, but we're not having those conversations in public. And what's happening is, and you've written about this in other situations, you piecemeal it and you kind of get the building out of the way, and then you take the next chunk of it and you kind of like work to force people's hands to ultimately get to your vision. But you're not getting people to buy into the vision up front, because you're not sharing the vision with people up front, and you're not being transparent about what your plans are. And that's the thing that is, that does not land well with people.
Yeah,
it doesn't, nor should it. I'm going to be living with the consequences of some of these decisions a lot longer than some of the people making these decisions. My boys, I'm a lifer. My boys are growing up around here. We're invested in the community. We deserve to have to be heard sometimes, and to have an audience sometimes. And I would say that for I'm not even a citizen of Troy, but I do enough in downtown Troy that I think I've earned that.
Yeah. So where does the THPA go from here? What are the big things that we can expect the Alliance to be working on as it moves forward?
Well, so it's important for us to do some soul searching, and we have again, can't say enough good things about our board. I think the board has really taken a hard look at that, and like, what is our role? We're not trying to usurp any other organization's role in the community. It was never our plan.
Let me just say this. There were organizations that have, in their mission and vision, the historic preservation of Troy, and to be quite frank, they kind of blew it on this one.
I think that's a fair observation. And I will also say that they were key collaborators for us. So thankfully, yeah. So and supporters of us. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that for as much lip service as we paid our downtown, and it is an absolutely gorgeous downtown, and part of that's due to the city's investment. You know, I want to be fair here. The city has made some investments in the downtown. The city has also not always been a good steward of buildings that it has owned. And I think of the building next to the development office. Yeah, I think it's the one next to
the Shaughnessy Appliance.
Yeah, where Shaughnessy Appliance was. That's right. That's the very building where, the city kind of let the plumbing freeze up in the building and go and burst, and just was not a good steward of that building. So the city's kind of had a little bit of a mixed record there. So, I mean, so where do we go from here? I mean, we understand that we have to move upstream and do a lot more earlier on, so we don't wait until the 11th hour to get involved with a building's future. It is very expensive. It is. I never want to have to go through it again. I won't say that I won't go through it again, but I don't want to go through another one of those again. And we just have to do more in the education space and advocacy space, and really show our downtown stakeholders that we're there to help and not to be the nonprofit of no. We talked a lot about that. Is like, we have to make sure that we never become that for the community. We have to deliver solutions, and I think we showed we are earnest about trying to do that. I mean, I can't tell you how many people said, well, you need to buy that building. If you're so important, you need to buy the building. I mean, just, yeah, over and over again. Well, okay, that's what we did.
Yeah.
And for a season, we had it, and it worked out. But really, we need to be more active in the advocacy space. We are currently working right now around expanding the National Register of Historic, the Public Square Historic District, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. And I think there's going to be a need for a lot of education around that, because I think some people see the National Register as, oh, well, I can't do anything with my building. Well, a listing on the National Register is really just a point of pride. It is a recognition. It's something to publicize and be proud of, but it's not necessarily going to save a building from demolition. So, I mean, there little asterisks. I mean, sometimes, as you know, Bill, sometimes you have Section 106 reviews if federal money has been spent and so forth. But by and large, that's not what a National Register district does. And so we're going to be active on that front. I mentioned the programming that we're going to be doing to help support property owners, residential property owners, commercial property owners, and maintaining their properties and so forth. There may be some other facets that we get into over time, but I think I can promise you that there was a period after the Trinity Church building ended up, surviving, that we kind of faded into the background again. And that's not going to happen again. I don't think, at least not with any of the folks who are currently involved with the board. People are very, very dedicated and understand that you have to be proactive. You have to offer up solutions. But it's important to include us in the conversation sometimes too, don't hold us at arm's length, because I think folks who maybe have their doubts about us are going to be pleasantly surprised when they allow us to come alongside them and try to work to solve some of these issues. I think we can bring a lot to the table.
This may be an unfair question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think
Okay.
the city has taken its historic architecture for granted?
Um,
Because it almost seems like the assumption was, we're going to find good people to take care of these buildings and just expect them to do that.
yeah, I think it takes a real intentionality around your historic building environment. I mean, that we just went through the comprehensive plan process again,
Mhm.
and that it identified the downtown as a top priority. I think the highest priority for the community. So it is the place where people really get a sense of place, and they really can get a sense of what Troy is about, and kind of all the generation. There's no better place to kind of get a sense of all the generations that have accrued to create the culture and so forth. I mean, so your downtown does that better than anywhere else. And I don't think uh, our city government has had the intentionality that it needs to have around ensuring that continues. Now, I think there are signs like, there's an interest in, creating a program to help redevelop upper floors. So I think there's a recognition that you have to invest at a certain level. But I think until we really kind of address the downtown stakeholder piece of it, and really have the downtown stakeholders actually more directly involved in the downtown decision making, I think we're going to continue to have a checkered record as a city, which is too bad, because the downtown Troy is just absolutely gorgeous, and that's a real tribute to generations of stewardship and the investments of recent decades as well. But we just have to be really intentional about our downtown and not let things get to the point that they got to with the Odd Fellows building.
Yeah, because I think, and I asked the question because it's like, downtown is definitely the top place in the community. I have a standing bet with any of my readers. I will happily buy you lunch in downtown Huber Heights if you can show me where downtown Huber Heights is. And so,
no offense, Huber Heights, but
so it's like we have a place, and it's like I don't know if a lot of people equate that as we have a historic place. And how much does the history and the architecture build into that place? And I tend to believe it probably is more than we realize, because if we didn't take care of these places, in the 1950s, we could have easily had another almond store, on every quadrant.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And it's like, I remember BK Photo growing up with that ugly aluminum,
right,
whatever the heck that was.
Right. Yeah, it was not a good look, was it? And I love BK Photo. The business was great, but man,
nothing against the business. It was just, but I mean, for 1975, that's what it was.
Low maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we have to eat our own cooking, right? We have to take our own medicine, and as a nonprofit, that's why we have to move upstream too, because it's important for us to be involved in those early conversations. And I just think there are so many organizations that, Troy Community Works, Troy Main Street, ourselves. We've got a lot of museums downtown. We've got a real network of nonprofits and museums and so forth. Is like, have them be part of the conversation too, along with, there's many stakeholders that depending on the topic, but I just, I just come back to the collaboration piece, that it's about finding the common ground. Maybe there's certain things that we can agree on, but I think if you look for it, you can always find the common ground and start to find projects that you can bring together a lot of stakeholders on and turn into a win for the community. And that's what we want to be. We want to be a catalyst for the win-win when it comes to our downtown built environment. And so whatever we need to, however we need to evolve over time to help enable that and support that, I think that's what we're here for.
Well, and you bring that up, and it's like, I know one of the unique things you've done with the ILOF building is you've put in deed restrictions and covenants for that I don't think's been done in this community before.
Correct.
Are there any efforts to kind of explain to other downtown property owners what that looks like, what that process is, and get others to join in with it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. I would say once we are fully finished with the process, that is our intent, is to explain that process to people as a tool in the toolbox to consider. It's a voluntary thing.
Correct.
It is not something we're trying to foist onto anyone or saying this is what you need to be doing. No, not at all. What we are trying to do is raise awareness of everything from, these easements to historic tax credits to other things that, depending on the size of the project, depending on the circumstances, might be something that is worth a property owner's while. And in some cases, maybe not, but we're just trying to introduce some new tools to the toolbox in the community. And frankly, in the process, we were trying to lock in some value for all of our donors. So it kind of had a double purpose there. We wanted to give, we didn't want our donors to be in the same position, again, with this building anytime soon. So it's kind of a little bit of a bulwark against deja vu.
Okay, fair enough. What are some other things you guys are going to advocate for moving forward? Or
well, the Planning Commission one is a big one, and there are 80 communities in Ohio that are certified local governments. So there's been a lot of work on that front, and I really would love to see some more curiosity from current or future administrations on that. So we're going to continue to advocate for that. I think I mentioned the series, the educational series that we started with called This Troy House, where we're trying to help support homeowners in either doing research or doing rehab on their properties. I think longer term, we may look at expanding beyond the core downtown area and looking at some other properties. And I don't have a specific one in mind, in case you're wondering. But I think, there are our historic potential doesn't just rest in the downtown core. That's where much of it rests, but not all of it. So, and there's a lot of other nonprofits similar to ours that do a lot of great work. Obviously Dayton, you look over in Arcanum, they're restoring their opera house over there. There's I think there's probably some networking opportunities that we haven't fully explored. But no, it's I'm really excited for the future. And next year's America 250. Mm-hmm. And going to be a great opportunity to showcase the community's history. And I'm hopeful, like it was back during the bicentennial, that it will just kind of stoke an interest in history again. And so we'll see if that happens. But I'm excited to see what next year brings. But I have to be honest, Bill, being on the board of the Overfield Tavern Museum and given what they've just been through, that's taken up a lot of the bandwidth right now.
Oh, I understand completely. And, your comment about, other areas in the downtown being historic accurate.
Yeah.
I
There's some cool places, you live in an older neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right. And you grew up right, just living around all that. There's some spaces with some pretty cool potential.
You think about it, you've got Hobart Circle, where there are Tim Hortons with all of the steel houses. That in itself it's historic and unique. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you've got that Lustrin house, which wasn't made in Troy. I get it, but that Lustrin house sitting there on the bike path. That and so you've got some really cool mid-century properties like that, and people love those properties. They have like a cult following, and people and so how can you bring back some of those properties and find interesting, creative ways to reuse them and make them fresh again for people? I think where we can try to help with the imagination piece, and the repurposing piece, we want to continue to be active in that space.
Okay, great. Well, we're almost done with our hour. Is there anything else you want to add, Ben?
I don't think so, Bill. I appreciate you creating the platform for some of these conversations, and hopefully, we'll continue having dialogue about historic preservation. It's a really interesting topic. I think we all have a vested interest in it, whether we know it or not. It's a big part of our future. It's not just about looking in the rearview mirror. It's just as much about how can you leverage some of these spaces that need some help and make it work financially, and then benefit from the unique character of some of those spaces. So it's it really fills my cup, and I hope I hope your listeners will continue to engage with that aspect of our community, because we're really blessed in Troy to have what we have.
We truly are. Well, Ben, thank you for your time. We'll see you later.
Take care, Bill. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.